the end of April in the year 2001, and it's part of our archive program. My name is Bill Pollack, and I'm sitting here with Dave Bracken on the end here. And Dave was one of the perennial officials of the Cal Club and other organizations in racing back in the 50s. And Tommy Farrell, to my right, was not only a racer himself, but was one of our announcers. All of this was volunteer work in those days. Nobody got paid for anything. And Tommy sounds a little strange. He explained to me he's had a little surgery on his throat, so makes his voice sound a little unusual. But we'll pick up.
Okay, I'll make it as clear as I can.
Okay. Anybody want to start off, David?
He's older. Let him start.
I don't talk very well either. However, we were rehashing the other day, and I was talking about a race we had in Vegas around the convention center. It was the first one that Cal Club had. I don't know, were you there, Tommy?
No.
And you said you weren't there.
No, I wasn't there.
Well, the weather was terrible, and it started to hail, and it was cold. And all of a sudden, Harold Trackler, who was on one of the corners, called me and said, "David, how many cars in this race?" And I said, "I don't know, Harold, why?" He said, "I think they all just spun out on my corner." So I got a call from a couple of more corners, and I red flagged the race. Ken Miles came up. I don't remember. He wasn't driving the shingle because I could get in. And he said, "What did you stop the race for, David?" I said, "Ken, they're sliding all over the place. There's no traction." "Oh, it's all right. Get in. I'll show you." Well, like a fool, I got in the car. So he takes off down the first straight, sets up for the corner, and just keeps going straight ahead. I looked over at him, I said, "Any questions, Ken?" "No." Turn around and go back to start-finish line slowly and let me off. And it was that bad. So it finally dried out. We got everybody on the track to dry it out, and we went back to racing again. But that was a miserable weekend.
Tommy, you were showing me a picture of a Ferrari.
Yes.
I don't know if we can pick that up, but
Can you pick this up?
I don't know. We'll take a shot of it later.
Okay.
Wait a minute, just stay right where you are.
Okay. You're going to zoom in on it?
Yeah.
We've got it.
Okay.
This was a small Ferrari. I
What do you mean
think
small?
a small in engine size.
Okay.
Say under 3 liter.
Oh, okay.
And it raced against the other Ferraris, which means it had to get out of everybody's way.
Yeah.
So
You were racing this?
this
Where was this?
that was at Santa Barbara
What time?
Yeah. All right.
in about 1954, 3 or 4. That's as close as I can get. But Santa Barbara was on an airport course. The straightaway was the long take where they took off from. But at the end of it, when you came to the first turn, if you remember, it went from that wide to barely 2 cars wide.
Yeah.
And it was a very sharp turn, sharp right turn, and a little wiggle, and then another right turn down into the back chute. That first corner we called the glass trash.
Glass trash?
Trash, because of the Corvettes. They were all going at least 6 wide down the straightaway, and then they all had to get in that little big corner going that way, and then went bang. But trying to get that Ferrari around that corner and out of everybody's way was a real job. But I enjoyed it. I had a good time with it.
Good.
It wasn't mine. I was driving it for a plastics manufacturer named Gene Greenspan. But I had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah. Those small Ferraris were beautiful cars.
Yeah.
Tell him the story about his nickname was Dodd.
God?
G-O-D, which stood for Grumpy Old David, when he was growling at people on the corners. But Tom handed out the name.
A guy came to me with an open wheel car and wanted 3 laps for setup because he was having a lot of problems. Well, we were racing, I don't know, small fender with fenders and all of that, regular sports cars. I said, okay, you come up, start, finish, and I'll let you out when the last car is around way over on the other end of the track. This was at Santa Barbara. So I said, but if you pass anybody for any reason except they're stalled, your head's going to be on a stick. He says, oh, no, Dave, honest, I won't. So he took off, and every corner started with, there's an open wheel car out here with the fender cars. It's okay, it's with permission. About the 4th call, I finally said, all corners, the open wheel car is out with permission, drop the subject. Then I hear, who said that? And before I can answer, the guy on Central says, God. And the came back with, oh, pardon me, Dave.
And that's hard
So
to isn't it?
it was, we decided it was G-O-D, grouchy old Dave would do. And then it started on the PA. Alan was using it a little bit, and I finally said, drop it altogether, Alan. It's not too good for the public. They don't understand us.
You know, I was a driver most of the time. Well, pretty much all the time.
I know, I was behind you a few times.
So I never got into the, you know, like the actual racing administration. Like I was a Cal Club official, but you were right there. You were the online guy, and I'd like to hear some of the you know, about the Palm Springs and Santa Barbara and other places.
Oh,
that,
boy.
You know, I know you were like the race steward on a lot of these courses, and it was all amateur. You were, you know.
Well, we, fortunately at that time, we ran races without committees.
Yeah.
Now, I don't care. Committees are great. Committees are beautiful things. You've seen the camel, which was
Yeah.
designed as a horse.
Yeah.
Before and after the race, committees are great, but not during. Somebody has to be in charge. And I was stuck, so I was in charge. Who to black flag, who not to black flag, who to talk to, who to get off the track. Those were things that were fun, and I thought my judgment was fairly decent. As to the racetracks, Santa Barbara was a ball, as you know. Palm Springs, I never worked Palm Springs as a chief steward. I was crowd control there. That's when I started. And it was fun. Riverside was a great track in a lot of ways. In a couple of ways, it was kind of dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
But all in all,
Who were some of the drivers that gave you a problem?
don't ask me who drivers are.
Tell them about Sterling Moss.
Sterling, dear Sterling. Sterling ran through an open gate at start-finish line to get on the track for practice. Well, the guy that opened the gate caught hell, and Sterling had no business out there. He hadn't been teched, hadn't had anything. So I'm ready to black flag him, only I got a call from turn 9. We don't have to black flag him. He just spun out here, and the car's on fire.
Oh, my God.
So I said, well, put it out and tell Sterling I want to see him at start-finish line. And then the next call from turn 9 is, Sterling won't let us use the fire extinguisher. I said, hit him in the head with the fire extinguisher and put the fire out. Well, tow truck came out, and the fire was out, and no damage to speak of. And Sterling didn't want all that powder all over the car, which I don't blame him, but on the other hand, we don't need an explosion in a big fire.
Right.
So I never did see him until that night at a nice cocktail party at the Riverside Inn. And he said, Area wants to see me. I said, yes, Sterling, I do. I said, if you ever pull the stunt you pulled today when I'm running a race, you will not be racing. I don't care how much they paid you to import you here or anything. You won't be racing. He looked at me. He says, you mean that, don't you? I said, try me. Oh, I'm awfully sorry, sir. He never did that again. And we got along beautifully, and there was never any problem there.
It was a little squirrely, though.
I'm sorry.
He was a little squirrely.
Oh, just a touch here and there. He's a hell of a driver, though.
Yeah.
Oh, my.
But I was traveling across the country at the time in nightclubs. I did a nightclub act with Peter Marshall and Farrell, and we traveled in my Porsche. Now, we had to put all of our wardrobe in there, and the music, and the props, and the funny hats, and everything had to fit in that Porsche, and our dirty clothes from the week before. And it fit one way. If one thing was out of place, we had take everything had to start all over again, repack the car. And we were traveling across the country in a Porsche, which was a lot of fun because there weren't many of them around then. This was in 53, 54. And when we got to, I raced it at Thompson, Connecticut, and I raced it in outside of Chicago, in
Don't look at me.
Minneapolis, somewhere near there.
Yeah. I don't know.
Small track, but a lot of very anxious drivers.
But you were racing a car that you were using to...
And Peter is holding the blackboard for me, saying, slow down. We open tomorrow night in Cleveland, you know. This is what I had on the blackboard. So I didn't do very fast, but we ended up we were playing at the Mount Royal Hotel in Montreal, and it started to snow. I mean, bad, heavy snow. And we didn't have any chains, and we didn't know if we should put them on a Porsche. And there was a Volkswagen agency in Montreal, and we went in there one afternoon and said, look, we got to drive to Toronto from here, and we don't have chains. And he says, oh, very easy. He said, let the air out of the tires about halfway until they go like this. He said, it works great in the snow. Just get behind the truck and stay there. He says, pretty straight road from here to Montreal, not too many places to get lost from Toronto to Montreal. So we did. We let the air out of the tires, and we got behind the truck. When we got into Toronto, where the snow wasn't so bad, we pulled into a gas station and put air back in the tires.
Oh,
But
boy.
we had a lot of adventures on the road.
You raced a lot, too, huh?
Yeah, we did. Every town we went to that had a raceway, I was very lucky. They would let me in because I was appearing at the Palmer House or wherever the heck it was. You know, in those days we were doing vaudeville. Played the State and Lake Theater, the Oriental, the Chicago Theater, and played the Palace in New York. Anyhow, I scared Peter to death. He says, do you realize what happens if you wreck that thing, we don't open tomorrow night? And we had some jumps, boy. We closed in Houston and opened in Chicago.
That's a pretty good drive.
Now we had to drive straight through for that one.
So did you have a coupe or a...
Coupe.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a coupe. And I got a picture of it. There's another one. That was at Paramount Ranch. When I had a very interesting thing happen. You know the bridge, the tunnel at the end of the street, you go up the hill? I went up the hill and no brakes.
That's interesting.
Yes, I just sneaked all the way around the track to get back to the pit. Young and foolish.
Yes, that was your nickname. We had the Continental.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like a 53?
Yes. And it was Eleanor
Von Neumann.
Van Newman's car.
Uh-huh.
And she wanted a new one. The new one's coming in. So I was talking to Johnny, and I said, I want a car, I want a Porsche for the road. And she said, but sell him mine. I said, yeah, okay. Will you make me a deal?
Yeah.
He says, he won't, but I will.
But that was pretty ballsy to take off cross country. I mean, looking, those cars are really pretty reliable. Nobody really knew. And
No,
Oh.
and when we were traveling, like through Texas or Oklahoma, and we needed gas, we stopped at a gas station, and go around and open up the front, and the guy come out and go,
yeah,
somebody stole your engine. And then we'd say, no, it was there a little while ago. But it was, and it would always attract a crowd, in Omaha or Ohio, someplace, some small town, people say, what is that? But it was fun.
They were a fun car, though.
Yes, it was.
Still
I
are.
had a green one, and I was sitting, making some notes. I had just called on somebody, and I had the door open. I was sitting in the passenger seat, and this car was my first one. It was kind of a pinky green color. And this old guy walked up and looked at the car and looked at me, and he said, hey, Sonny, looks like you picked it before it got ripe.
Remember Joe Fisto?
Yeah,
The
from the comic.
He stuttered,
Yeah.
And before I got the Porsche, I had an MGTD. And Joe lived not far from me, and he was always standing on the corner of Ventura Boulevard and Coldwater trying to get a ride into the Brown Derby. That was his office, the Brown Derby. First bar stool as you walked in, that was Joe's office. And so he said, what is this, Sid? And I said, it's a British car, an MG. He says, is there room for two? I said, yeah, right here, sit right there. And I opened the door, and he got down into the seat. He says, is this a toy? And I said, no, I'll show you. And I drove him to Brown Derby. We pulled into the valet parking thing, and he got out of the car a little slowly, and he said to the valet, he says, let this be a lesson to you. He said, this used to be a Buick, and he washed it in detergent.
We were going up north in my convertible D. Don't ask me what model or year or anything else. And I'd packed all the luggage in the back seat, quote unquote. And I came out, and people are watching me because they don't understand these things. I'd already released the hood, and I got this long bag that fits in front of the gas tank. So I looked at that and I said, oh, nuts. I looked in the back, I said, oh, to heck with it. And I flipped the hood real quick, threw the thing in and slammed it down. And the people are going, he just put that in with the engine. A lot of fun. Back to racing.
Yeah.
I had a right-hand drive TCMG, and I was on my way to Bakersfield, and a motorcycle cop pulled me over, and he walked up to my wife, who was sitting on the left-hand side of the car, and wanted to see her driver's license. And I said, she doesn't have one, and he looked at me like, wow, she in trouble. And I said, and she doesn't have a steering wheel either.
Oh, those were, I had,
That was a half an hour of walking around the car.
yeah.
you know.
Those were more fun than anything. I had one, and I'm driving to San Diego and got stopped in Oceanside at a signal. And the guy in a Cadillac pulls up and he says, "What kind of a thing is that?" I said, "It's a little British MGTC. He says, "Does it go?" I said, "Well, I'm keeping his attention away from the signal." I says, "Well, when the signal changes, I'm gone, and you're going to still be sitting here wondering what happened to me." And about that time, the signal went green, and I dumped it. He was a half a block behind before he woke up. Oh, that was the most fun car I think I've ever had.
They were a lot of fun.
Racing in the early days of the 50s was fun.
Well,
Now,
Really fun.
that's why I quit. I quit in 63, I think it was. No, it was 67. Because I went, my mother, God bless her, took my wife and I on a cruise for 2 months. Oh, that's beautiful. And I had told Sylvia Treichler, our club secretary, I did not want to run for the board again. Well, she put my name in anyway. I was elected the board,
that's the Cow Club.
Cal Club. And when I got back, I was a little upset with her because I really didn't want to have any part of it. Because it was starting to be committees. So, I don't even know what I was going to say.
It was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago.
About why you quit.
But, yeah, I served my term on the board, and then that was the end of it. And I just got no fun.
I raced from 53 to 58, on and off, whenever I could. But in 1958, we broke up the act. Both Pete and I got signed to a series. He was signed at Columbia, and I was signed by Desilu. And in the contract, somebody told him that I was racing, and it was in the contract I couldn't do that anymore in 58. So then I started announcing.
And that was good.
And that was fun.
Yeah, you were great. You were fabulous.
But the series I did ran from 58, 59, for a year and a half. It was, it was called This Is Alice, story about a little girl and I was the father. And our sponsor was Vicks Vapor Rub. Now, every month I would get a case of Vicks Vapor Rub at the house. It's about so big, this high, you know. Now, if you live to be, I'm 80, and if you live to be 180, you wouldn't use a case of Vicks Vapor Rub in your life. So this stuff started to stack up. It shouldn't have had, you know, J&B Stocks or something as a sponsor. So finally, a doctor about here, and I said, "What am I going to do with this?" And my wife said, "Why don't you call the Children's Hospital and see if they'll take it?" I said, yeah. So I told them, I said, "Could you use about 8 or 10 cases of Vicks Vapor Rub?" And they said, "Yes." I said, "Come and get it." And they did. Vicks Vapor Rub. I never liked the smell of it anyhow.
There is kind of a little bit of a after.
Oh, yeah, to this day.
Oh, God. That's funny. Where did Peter go? Is he, Peter still around?
Yeah. He's traveling on the road. He's a hell of a singer, you know.
Yeah.
And he's traveling on the road with the Les Brown Band.
Oh, wonderful.
And he just had a new album come out, and the disc thing, you know. Oh, it's beautiful.
The Peter Marshall, didn't he have a quiz show or something like
He
that?
had Hollywood Squares.
Okay.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yes. And people really didn't realize what a good singer he was. He sounded like Dish Hames,
Uh-huh,
a lot like that.
yeah.
But Peter came out to,
You're an old showbiz family. Your mother, your mother
Glenda
was
Farrell.
Huh?
Glenda Farrell was under contract with Warner's for years and years. She starred out there.
She had a nightclub in the valley, if I remember.
No. Peter Lynn Hayes' mother had a nightclub.
Oh,
Grace
okay,
Hayes,
that's
yeah.
right, all right.
But I was very fortunate in the business. I did just about everything. I did 3 shows in New York to start out on Broadway, and then I went into nightclubs, played every major club in the country. We headlined in Vegas. I have a big poster. I got my partner was Gene McCarthy and Farrell at the Frontier Hotel. Headlined in Vegas, headlined in vaudeville at the Palace in New York. That was the best you could do then. I did 4 different TV series and 18 westerns and 45 45 films, major films. Singing in the Rain. I was in. I did. I worked for a lot of good directors, but that's got nothing to do with racing. Racing was more fun to talk about. I loved it. Scared the living hell out of myself. Every time, the night before, cocktail time, with Lance Revitt and all the guys sitting around pouring the booze, and boy, it's going to be good tomorrow. Big time. Just everybody thinks they're Fonzio the night before the races. Then comes the next morning, and you're sitting there on the grid, and you're looking at all the guys around you, and you've looked over the course, and it does this for no reason, you know. And you're saying, what am I doing here? You know. Our Father who art in heaven, how did I get into this?
I remember that.
And then you start, the way you do, and then you forget all about being scared. You know, then you're just trying to not run into anybody and get away from the guy behind you. But it was fun.
I remember Minden. Were you at Minden?
No.
You lucked out. Minden was an artistic success, but a complete bust as money goes. But D.D. Mitchellmore was racing. Arnie Kane was starting. And Arnie's running, making his run down the line to see that everybody's ready. And D.D. has got a book. Arnie stops and looks, and Dee Dee's book is How to Win at Road Racing.
He was a funny guy.
Oh, he was beautiful, man.
But those pre-race jitters were, I remember I would just be dying, and Phil Hill was the same way. And Phil got hold of this stuff. It was vitamin B1 or B12, and it came in a tube with a little spoon, which if you got caught with one of those little spoons now,
You're in trouble, right?
but this was a little, tiny little thing, and you'd squeeze out maybe a quarter of a teaspoonful into this little spoon, and it'd, take it. So he and I would sneak off into the trees and either upchuck or take a little spoonful of stuff. And anybody saw us, they would have said, oh, wow, we know what they're doing.
I'd have heard about it in 3 seconds.
I mean, it was really...
I drove the Porsche and that one little Ferrari in one race, the only time I drove a Ferrari. But you drove some of the hairiest beasts on 4 wheels. I remember the first time I saw you was up at Torrey Pine, up at the 17-mile drive.
Pebble Beach.
Pebble Beach. And you were driving that Ferrari with the white sidewalls, number 14.
The Allard.
The Allard, the big Allard, with a Cadillac engine in it.
Yeah.
And you had an accident. And Johnny Hart and I went over to the hospital to see you, and we waited there till they said, well, you were going to be all right.
Right.
And then you drove and
Break.
Oh, okay.
And take a break.
oh, okay.
Anyhow, you were saying that, up at Pebble Beach.
Yes,
and,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
I had just wrecked a,
A tree spun out in front of you.
it jumped right out.
And
They have a habit of doing that.
Yeah.
what was
It
that? There was another car that was in a movie, in the first big race movie. And it looked kind of like an Allard. It had the side mounts, the a different drill.
Fraser Nash?
No, not like that, something like that. But it had side mounts and very hairy looking. And Kirk Douglas drove it in a movie.
Oh, you mean another car that I?
Yes, that
Oh,
you
that
drove.
was the that was the HWM.
The HWM, that's the one. That was a hairy brute.
Yeah, that car was a long, narrow car, and it would go great in a straight line as long as you didn't want to turn. And it originally had a 2-liter British, great big, heavy 2-liter engine in it. They took that out and they put a very light but very powerful Chevy. It was like 150 pounds lighter and 200 horsepower or more, which, just changed that car completely. So it would go screaming in a straight line. But I remember at Seafair in Washington, I was on the pole, and Carroll Shelby was in a big Ferrari, and Maston Gregory was in a big Ferrari, and I out-accelerated everybody. But when we got to the first turn, it was like, whoa, geez, It's like trying to get a 20 mule team to go around the corner. This car just didn't want to make a turn. I mean, you had to come to a stop, and then, then it was like, all right, now I'll turn. It was a terrible handling car, but beautiful looking.
Oh, yeah, it looked great.
But it's gone through a bunch of, in fact, I recently got an email from a guy by the name of Talbot in England, in London, who now has the car.
Oh, it's back in England
It's
again.
back in England, and he was, we were emailing back and forth, and he wanted to know about how to get the car to handle.
You don't.
I said, sell it. I said, it'll be great to drive around town, go to pubs
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. But he ran it at Brooklands and a couple of places where, on a bank track where you don't have to make too many turns. I guess it would work out all right. But beautiful looking, but something wrong about
that-
geometry.
That Allard was a handful, wasn't it? Ooh.
Well, it looked more of a handful than it was. The man that owned it, Karstens, was a genius with setting up a chassis.
Oh.
And even though it looked weird, from where I sat, it didn't look weird.
Yeah.
And it did what I wanted it to do. And on those short courses that we ran, which were mostly under 2 miles around, I didn't have to try to go through a corner at 100 miles an hour, although it probably could, but I could come down slow and out-accelerate anybody behind me. The Ferraris, they just couldn't.
You
Couldn't
ran away
compute.
from him up in Pebble.
Phil would catch me at the end of the straight, because I would shut down way soon, because our brakes were never on a par with the Ferrari brakes. So we'd shut down early, and he wouldn't be able to get around me, because I'd take plenty of the wheels.
Get wide.
And then, of course, once I got around the corner, I'd punch it, and that was the end of the story. And I know it drove it nuts. So I could hear the Ferrari, going through the gears back there, and I'd just leave it in second gear and just take off. But yeah, I would say that probably on a 4-mile course, the Ferraris would have just gone blowing by us, or Sebring, something like that. We had a 5,000-foot straightaway. Allard probably had a top speed of 110 or 20, the way we had it geared. It wasn't too aerodynamic.
No.
It was a fun car. And then, in the 50s, it felt good. Now, to go back, drive it, to get out of a modern car today,
oh,
and go
yeah.
back into one of those old vintage cars, it's really scary because you go, what's all this play in the steering wheel? And they say, what do you mean? Oh, what is that? That's normal. Okay. And you're used to driving something with precision steering, so it's.
Well, when I got to be announcing, they put me up at turn 6.
Oh, at Riverside.
At Riverside, at the top of the
The hill, the
Yeah.
where everybody sits. You know?
the bleachers.
Grandstand. I was up at the top of the grandstand, and the wind was blowing like crazy, and the cars were, I'd see them coming up through 1 and 2 and 3, 4 up and into 6 was a sharp turn, and it went down into a decreasing radius turn. In other words, it was bent the wrong way. Instead of being bent like this, it was bent like that. So you really had to slow down for that thing, or you'd end up in the sand. And everybody would go through the top of 6 like this.
Yeah. A lot of cars.
All
a lot
arms
of
and
people
elbows.
lost it.
I can remember Scooter Patrick. I loved to bug him, and he'd love to bug me. But we were racing. Now everybody's out there with their big boards and their stopwatches catching times. So I found a calendar. As Scooter went by, I turned the page. He almost didn't make it through 1 and 2. He came back later laughing.
That's great, dude. I never heard that story. That's a wonderful story. But turn 6 at Riverside was
A bear.
yeah. It was a popular place for spectators because
Yeah,
that's where people.
It all happened.
Yeah. You're going to lose it. That's where you lost it.
that, very true.
And everybody would come up and they were sliding through,
Yeah.
They'd stop for it and they'd come into the turn and they'd go this way and then this way and down. It was a bear.
The downhill too was fun. I was the very first at Riverside, the Times Grand Prix, I think it's called. I was driving a Lister. That's a British car. Lister was an ironworks manufacturer that made fences.
Is that the one with the big Chevy in it?
Yeah. And he was a fence manufacturer that decided to build a race car. I don't know what the connection is, but it handled about like a load of fence. And it looked aerodynamic, but it had no. It had these big mounds over the front wheels, which were perfect airfoils, which lifted the front end. So when you got going really fast, the front end came up like this. And you couldn't see. It was like you were in a tunnel. So you were passing cars on either side that, when they got to about here, they were gone. And it's a terrifying feeling. All of a sudden, this guy, you don't know what's happening with this guy, because he's hidden behind this big mound of fiberglass. But that car, I was going down that straightaway about 160 and the engine froze.
Oh,
And I couldn't understand what the heck was going on, because all of a sudden I'm just loose as a goose, and I look down and the tack is like this, the speedometer is like this, and I'm thinking, why is the engine Boy, it kept sliding and slipping and sliding, and finally got to the end of the straightaway and did a big loop.
leaving oil for the rest of the guys coming by.
I think a valve broke and locked everything up, but I've never had that feeling before or since.
And don't want it again.
Because it's a mystery, because all of a sudden the rear end is just slipping and sliding because your wheels are stopped. The rear wheels are just.
Oh, my. They were a lot of fun.
Oh,
I remember black flagging, trying to keep things light. So one time I had guys made me a giant fly swatter. They hadn't been paying attention to black flag too much. So I'm explaining you got to pay attention to black flag. pull in the next time around and find out what they want. If you don't, we have a new remedy, and we hauled out this big giant fly swatter. But it was fun. All of it was fun.
Remember Pomona in the rain?
Oh, yeah.
We were running at Pomona, and it started to rain in the morning, and the forecast was supposed to clear up by mid-morning. It never did. It rained all day. But I remember Phil Hill pulling off the track after a while, and David says, "What's wrong, Phil?" He says, "I'm just tired of spinning out in that puddle down there." And we had a little tunnel,
Yeah.
and Jim Parsonson in Austin Healy came roaring out of the tunnel backwards. In a white Austin Healy, I remember that picture of that car coming out of the tunnel backwards, and all the other guys were going this way.
Oh, man.
It was a huge parking lot, but it turned into a really interesting course.
Yeah, it was. Especially when it was wet.
Yeah, we did, fortunately, didn't have too much rain down here in the south.
No, we were
That was
really
only
lucky.
one time that we had the rain out.
We had rain in Riverside a couple of times, but nothing really bad. I don't think we ever had rain at Santa Barbara.
Yeah. I ran, one time I ran Bill Murphy Bueller. It rained on Saturday.
Oh,
and
it did?
I won the race on Saturday in Bill's Buick Curtis, but I sucked up water and didn't know it. And on Sunday, I was leading the race, and the piston burned because of the water.
I can remember you and I were co-chairman of a race at Santa Barbara, and a guy spun out on the entrance to the long straight up the hill.
Okay.
You wanted to start the race. I said, "No, we got to get the car out of there." "Well, he's all right. He's well up." I said, "He went out, somebody else might." So the tow truck went out and hauled him in. The second lap of the next race, same corners, same place, right on top of where the guy was.
Santa Barbara turned out a lot of celebrities too, do you remember? Like
Steve McQueen,
Porfirio
Rubirosa,
with Barbara Hutton.
Hutton, yes, with two
Lance's
T's.
mother, huh? Yeah. Yeah, McQueen was he was a nice guy.
Yeah, and he's a pretty good driver,
Yeah,
too.
he was.
He wasn't crazy like the one that got killed in this fight.
Jimmy Dean.
Well, he ran up at Santa Barbara, too.
Yeah.
And they both ran in speedsters.
Right.
But he was swirly.
Yeah.
Steve wanted to learn. He wanted to know how to do it right.
Well, Steve was a motorcycle rider.
Yeah.
Mainly. And, that teaches you a lot about
I would imagine, yeah.
sliding, slipping and sliding. So, sounds like they're coming. What did you say?
We're not speeding.
I can't run. I'll be right here waiting for him.
Yeah. The Santa Barbara was one of our favorite places to race.
Mine too.
You know,
Really was. I liked Riverside, but Santa Barbara was more fun.
Torrey Pines I liked a lot.
It was a relaxed
That
track.
was no room for mistakes at Pebble Beach, but Torrey Pines was more open.
Yeah, except that down at the end of the long straightaway, there was the cliff, the Palisade.
Oh, that.
Yeah.
I remember the guy, the brain surgeon from that had a Formula 3 that won all the Formula 3 races, but was just totally nuts. I was not racing. I was like a steward or something like that. And I remember he was late, and he came to the track, and he had this Formula 3, which was a
Little bitty thing.
little tiny thing with a motorcycle engine in the back, but they would go like crazy. And he came up to the starting line, and he says, "Which way does the course go?" I went, Well, I said, take it easy, do a couple laps, but it goes down that way, and then you're gonna make a right-hand turn. Okay. And he just took off, wound it up tight. I could hear this thing going all the way up in first gear, all the way up in second gear, all the way up in third gear, and then I saw this machine bouncing end over end. Just went right over, not even didn't even make an attempt. I mean, so he broke the spindle on the left front wheel, and they had little Fiat front ends in them, if I remember. So there was no way you could find a Fiat front end, so they took it into San Diego and they welded it. And you don't weld spindles, but he did, and he was back the next day and raced. Somehow it got past tech. I don't know.
I don't either.
I heard about it later, that they welded the spindle. They welded the
Wow.
Well, that's not something you'd really look for.
No, you're not going to check that.
Was it Torrey Pines?
Yeah, it was a Tory.
I remember we almost had a track in San Luis Obispo at the old Army, with the Army base there.
Yeah.
And I know one corner came under a lot of consideration because you made a hard right turn off a fairly long straight, and right off of the corner was the settling pond for the sewerage. You know what the corner was going to be named. We figured if anybody went off there,
Don't look for it.
No.
forget them. Easier to make new ones than it is to clean it up.
Just write a note in the program.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that never did develop, but it would have been a nice track.
Yeah, it's a big base up there.
Do you remember, I don't know if it was the first or not, race at Palm Springs? Tin Wynn was driving an Alpha with a big long nose. It had 2 rows of louvers going forever to the end of this thing. And when the race started, there was at the end of the straight, there was a left turn.
Right.
And he didn't make it. He went right into the hay bale.
Yeah, that was a tough left turn. I remember that left turn very well. We started on asphalt, but the turn itself was concrete. But there was a part of it that was asphalt. But if you didn't get partially turned before you got to the concrete, you were in a lot of trouble. And I had once, one of the times, started there, and I was like in the second or third row, and I was really upset about it because I should have been in the first row. I passed all these guys, and I went into this turn just way too fast. There's just no way I was going to make it. And I just cranked it over, and I got onto that concrete and everything, because in the asphalt, you forget it. But on the concrete, it was one of those fiberglass specials, had a big Ford in it. And I managed to make it through that turn, but I mean, my heart was right up there. It was just a real dumb move.
Next time was much slower around it.
Absolutely. I figured I was very lucky to get through that turn. And I wanted to be first out, I wanted to get in there first. Because it was a tough course to pass on. Once you got...
There were a lot of guys like that.
Yeah, I remember Carroll Shelby drove over an Allard at that same...
Oh, yeah?
He was about the second or third row and decided he was going to be first into that corner. And the guy in the Allard slowed down, and Carroll just went right over the top of him. Somehow lit on four wheels.
I remember at Pomona one time, I was walking the track. I was doing crowd control, walking the track, cautioning people to, if a car starts towards them, don't turn their backs, but move. And Dr., can't remember his name now, my doctor knew him quite well, spun out and ended up in the by the trees. And Carroll, for some reason, he didn't make it either around there. So we're standing there
Where
waiting.
are we? What course is this?
Huh?
Where are we?
In Pomona.
Pomona.
Sorry. And here comes another guy spinning out. And Carroll turns and starts to run. And I grabbed him by his overall straps that he always wore. And I said, "You know better than that." And he said, "Yes, I do. I'm sorry." So we watched the guy, and then all we had to do was move about 4 feet, get out of his way, and he came to a stop.
You're not going to outrun a car.
No.
That was, unfortunately, I think the doctor had died before he got hit, before he hit anything.
Oh,
Because there was, he had a bad cut, puncture wound, and no bleeding.
oh,
Ooh.
So
that's not a good sign.
that's not good.
No.
And I think later on they found out he'd had a heart attack.
Yeah, they should have caught that in tech.
We didn't.
Yeah. With the road.
You know, this guy's dead. He can't.
He
All
didn't
right,
die at the
Harvey, here's anher one.
Yeah. How do you get through? You know.
Well, he passed at Pomona.
The first 3 races he raced, he was dead.
What was the name of the guy? He had 3 names, and his son is racing now. And he used to race a speedster. And every time he won, they would call him in and have him inspected.
Ed Barker.
Barker.
Barker had a zipper put on that engine because no matter what he did, they tried to catch him, and he never did anything. He drove the car to the track, then he drove it home, and the night he got home, if he wasn't wiped out, he'd take the Porsche engine out of the thing and put a VW engine in so he could go to work. And then he'd work until the next race on the car. The car was perfectly prepared, and he was a good driver.
Yeah.
They never did find anything wrong with the car. They finally got tired of it. Every third protest we'll honor, and we'll tear his car down.
But it seemed to me every time he'd win, they'd haul him back.
Oh yeah, and he'd win 99% of the time. But the car was just superbly
You just
prepared.
push down on that pedal a little more there.
Yeah.
And he knew how to drive it, which is,
He had a long right foot.
yeah.
You know, when I was racing the Allard, I'd have guys come to me and they'd say, "Well, what do you got on that engine?" I said, "Well, we have a Chet Hurt roller kit." "Well, I've got that." "And we got an Edelbrock manifold." "Well, I got that." "And we've got such and such a kind of hits." "I got that." And I got everything that you have, but my car won't go as fast as yours.
You must be cheating.
Push
Yeah.
that pedal.
You gotta push some more. Make a little scoop under the throttle so that it'll go a little farther.
Push down.
Oh, I used to love that with poor Barker. Every time there was a protest on him. And finally we just decided every 3 we'll do something.
Yeah.
Only it might be 2, Ed, so don't try anything.
You know, I never fooled around with fuel or anything like that, and I don't think too many people did in those days. There might have been a few. There were some rumors about Von Neumann, but I don't know what. I think most of the guys played it pretty straight.
I think a lot of it that they caught was by accident. Guys just didn't know in those
They
days.
overboarded or something like that.
And they might have overboard a little bit or something like that and didn't realize what the hell they were doing.
Yeah. Couldn't work a slide rule.
Because you're not,
Nobody could work a slide.
Never saw.
all you're getting is a trophy, and it isn't worth a heck of a lot.
No.
And if you try to melt it down, you can use the wood on the base for something else, but that's about it.
Yeah.
And I don't really know of, maybe 3 or 4 guys were trying to cheat a little bit, but the average, I'd say 98% were square, honest,
Somebody
and
go get a
good
tank full
sportsmen.
of aviation gas or something like that.
Well, a lot of the people, like me, were driving their cars every day and racing among the results.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You change the tires and the plugs and tape Headlights.
Yeah.
Where you went?
I went out to the old Sandberg Ranch hill climb a couple of Sundays ago. And went up there and looked at it. This was one of our, I don't know, did you ever run there?
No,
in Sandberg?
no.
It's one of our early events. It was about a 2-mile, little over 2-mile hill climb that went from,
Oh.
it was on the old ridge route.
Ah.
It's actually from Highway 138, went up the hill. But hill climbs were a lot of fun too. Because you could just stand on it, go up the mountain.
As long as you didn't get near the edge.
Yeah.
Remember when Bruce Kessler wiped out start finish at Pomona?
Oh, well, Bruce Kessler was in a,
He,
bless him.
All his own.
We're gonna have to get a tape on him. He's
Yeah.
back in Miami.
yeah, I don't know whether he's in town now or not.
Yeah.
I think he lost his
You know,
boat
he
up
was,
in
you know,
Alaska
16 or
someplace.
17 years old when he started driving.
I like Bruce very much.
Yeah, me too.
I used to see him quite a bit down at the marina when I was living on the boat. And he quit racing.
Finally.
Well, I'll admit, I tried to get his license because Bruce, and I told him this, had a habit of locking up when he got in trouble. Just, the brakes would do everything. And Mary Hauser and I agreed on that a long time.
I remember him up against the ivy in Riverside on turn 4 or 5 going up he never made it to 6.
But
Well, he just put his foot in it and stood on it, and, you know, it takes a little more, but, you know, every now and then he'd get a car that would handle good enough that he could do something with it, but he was fast.
he was a great driver till he got in trouble. And I know he got in trouble at Willow, coming around that high corner up.
Yeah.
Oh, I had fun up there too. Hello there. What was his name? The announcer used "hello there" a lot. His son got killed on a
Oh, Frank something.
Frank something.
Had a
Anyway.
radio show.
He got very mad at me because I made him move his car out of that turn up the top of the hill at Willow. It's all right there. I said, Frank, you're going to have to move it. It's not in a good spot. And he was so mad at me, he couldn't even look at me without shaking and getting mad. For about 2 races that day. Then a car comes up through there that would have wiped his car out and him and everybody else. Spun off the road right through where I'd moved him from. Never had another piss of trouble with him.
Do you remember that there was a downhill after the hill
Yeah.
at Willow? And a friend of mine, Randall McDougall, who wrote the screenplay for Mildred Pierce.
Good writer.
Came out from the East Coast, wrote one screenplay for Mildred Pierce and got an Oscar. And he said, "What's so tough about that?" Randy had a Ferrari, had a little 2-liter, beautiful black and white Ferrari. It's the only black and white I've ever seen. And he was on that downhill, and I don't know what he did wrong, but he flipped it, and it went upside down and it lit on the wheels. And my brother, who's a photographer, happened to be out there and caught a picture of Randy. So I asked Randy, are you okay? Is everything all right? He said, "Oh, no problem. When I saw we were going to flip, I went down and I was in the cellar." My brother got a picture of it hanging out in the cellar. And unfortunately showed Randy or gave him a copy of the 8x10 glossy.
Uh-oh.
That was it. The Ferrari was off. It was gone in 50. It was like, sold it. That was the end of the racing. Because he was absolutely sure that he was.
Yeah, he was down in the cellar.
He was just a great. I had an experience at Will when we were first I designed that track, and when we were first laying it out and grading it. Harold Matheson, who owned the property, brought out one of these steamrollers, and I decided I'd never driven a steamroller, so I drove this thing up to the top. It took like a half an hour.
Yeah.
I finally got to the top, and I said, no way, I'm going to drive it all the way around. I'm not going to live long enough. So I managed to turn it around. Now, you stood up with this thing, and it had a huge, big lever for gear, putting it in gear and so on. And the steering was based on the RPM, so if it was idling, it didn't steer. The engine had to be turned at least a couple hundred RPM for it to steer. So I got it turned around, and I got it started down the hill, back toward the pits, and I decided, that's going to be too slow. I'm going to shift up. Big mistake. Because it's not synchromesh, it's just big, coggy gear. And when you shift out, you are out. You are not going to shift in.
You're not going to make it again.
So now I'm out of gear, going downhill, and the engine's idling, and it's heading off the road.
Uh-oh.
And there was a kind of a culvert, fortunately not too steep, and I'm standing up this thing like Captain Bligh on the bridge, and this thing's going through this gully, and it takes a couple, and I just bailed out off the back. It went up about another 15 feet and stopped. So much for steamroller.
No more racing those things.
No, that was the end of my racing steamroller.
Oh, the club got sued out on Willow. Some guy got himself hit at the first turn. Start, finish, and then the guy went off and hit this guy, and he was out there taking pictures. And everybody was yelling at him to get the hell out of there, and he wouldn't move. In fact, he was giving them the finger. Fortunately, we had pictures of it.
Oh, really?
And guy came to me he heard about the suit, and he says, Dave, I've got some pictures you'd like. And he hands these to me. I says, I not only like them, I love them. Can I buy them? He says, they're yours. So I gave them to Joe Wiseman.
The lawyer.
And he looked, he says, suit's over with, no problems. The guy backed off the minute he saw the picture. He claimed nobody told him to get out of there. And I had told him once, and he came back. That was a fun track, except for the wind.
When you look back at some of the pictures, we had snow fencing for crowd control.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, now they put up concrete barriers.
Yeah.
I mean, we use snow fencing.
We thought that was good.
Yeah, hey, we got snow fencing.
Yeah.
We had a good snow fence. We were happy as clams.
Well, we were very fortunate.
Amen.
To have something.
Well, that was one reason I really didn't get too friendly with drivers. I didn't want to lose any friends.
Yeah.
And I remember somebody used to say,
I want to tell you, drivers didn't want to get too friendly with you.
well, that's true, and I don't blame them either. Just to say that Ken was very bad. He wouldn't he'd ignore you.
Yeah.
They didn't realize he didn't hear you. He was deaf. If he didn't see you and you yelled like crazy at him, he'd ignore you because he didn't hear.
Yeah.
And when I finally realized that, then I'd make sure he saw me, and I'd wave and say something, and he'd stop and listen. He was a nice guy. He was a lot of fun.
Eleanor von Neumann was deaf.
Oh,
And a lot of people thought that she was a real...
I like Ellen.
Yeah, she was a great gal. But
Ellen, I wanted a
you'd say
convertible.
something to Eleanor, she'd walk right by you.
Yeah.
Hi, Eleanor, how's it going?
Remember when the Gia coupe or convertible came out? I told Eleanor, I says, I want one of those, I think. She called me about 4 weeks later, David, we just got a shipment of 6. Which one do you want? So I went over to Sunset to the shop, and they had one with the top up that looked great, and top down looked great, and then I looked in it, no place to put anything with the top down. And I used to travel with a nice bar and my big chair, and I learned also to take at least 2 pair of pants with me. I was at Riverside one time, Treichler poured a Kahlua drink, spilled it all over my pants, and that was the weekend I decided I only needed 1 pair of slacks. Why pack a lot of junk? Well, I sat up in the tower at Riverside. Who's got the coffee? I sent Carol out to buy me pants, and she couldn't find any place.
Yes, the flies must have liked you a lot.
Oh, yeah. I was very big with the fly. They didn't bother anybody else because he had them all bunched.
Well, that was good.
Yeah.
I liked that Riverside Tower, except I didn't like it. Climbing up and down didn't bother me. Les Richter was going to show me the tower. So we stomp up the tower, and to get to the top, and Les can't talk, because he's showing me how tough he is. Well, I learned a long time ago you can talk if you really start talking like that, and my, it's beautiful up here, and I turn around and go, boy, you can see the whole track here, Les, this is great, and he can't even answer me. But it was a nice tower, but you're out of touch. I like down on the ground where I can move.
Those were fun days.
And turned calendars for Scooter.
Yeah. Well,
About it?
I don't know. Got anything else you want to throw into the pot here while
I've run out.
we run out?
I probably could. I don't remember too well anymore.
I remember how I got started. We were in New York, and I was working in the Latin Quarter in New York. And Jackie Cooper was in the show, and his show closed. And he went to England, he came back, we were back in the Latin Quarter, and he says, hey, I'm racing for Austin Healey. I said, yeah, and he says, I'm racing up at Thompson, Connecticut this weekend. So I said, come on up. And I had my first person. So we drove up, and watched Jackie race, and he was driving pretty good then.
Mm-hmm.
And of course they had the cars, the factory was maintaining the cars and tuning them and doing it, everything. All you had to do was jump in and go. So there was a 3-hour enduro. And he said, that was on Sunday, and he said, Saturday, I'll get you in the club, in the sports car club, and they'll let me take you around the thing and show you, and then you have to do it by yourself, and then you have to drive one race, and then you get your license.
Oh, boy.
Okay.
Why not?
So he took me around the course, and Thompson was kind of fun. It was an oval, and you went this way, and then up the oval, up a hill, down. One of these turned at the bottom, and around, then back onto the track again. So I got through by myself. I didn't, set any records, but I stayed on the course. And they said, that's fine, now you have to drive a beginner's race. And they had about 12 MGs and me. And I came in third.
Pretty good, yeah.
That's the only race I ever came in the first 12 at. If there was 12 cars in the race, I'd run a close 11, maybe, But I got third. And Jesse says, "That's great, we're going to run the Enduro in your car." And my wife was saying, "We got to get back to New York in that car." That's a long drive, So Jesse said, "Oh, we'll be very careful." So he started, and we were running fourth or something, fifth or something like that. And that was my turn. And I got us back to 8th or 9th, and he got back in again, and he finished the race. But I had the car put all back together, and we got back to New York.
Oh,
And there was a little regular troop.
There was, but you're typical of there were a lot of drivers that just went out to have a good time.
Yeah.
That's what I did.
There was crazy fools like me that wanted to win, that wanted to be up there and had the fortunate, lucky or whatever to have the machinery that could do it. But there were also a lot of cars, they were just out touring around because it was the best way to see a race. And it was just, like,
I tried
it's
to.
pretty country.
I tried to stay out of the guy's way.
Couldn't do that today.
No.
No.
There's
No
no
way.
room for people to just go out and have a good time.
Well,
It was just,
the pictures we have of the fabulous 50s, you look at Palm Springs or several of the other courses, and the proper line through a turn in the races today is single file. Everybody goes single file. You look at those old pictures, and they're 8 abreast
yeah.
going into a corner.
Everybody had his own idea.
Yeah. Well, I got started in the whole thing. My mistake was buying a Riley.
That was
That was a
That was a
nice
big
little
mistake.
automobile. It was a big mistake, but I loved that car. I drove it for over 3 years and had a ball with it. But I went to a tech inspection. Sumner Bennett invited me to a tech at Alan Moss's. And everybody was trying to get in at once. And I looked at that and I said, this ain't going to work. So I went to work on my own and lined up the cars, and everybody was happy. Finally, we got, we're in a line, and nobody's trying to push and all this. And then I ended up doing crowd control for tech inspection for 2 races. Then Ann, our club secretary, announced at Palm Springs that I was crowd control for the race. I says, I don't have any people. She says, you'll find some. Well, fortunately, that was one track where you just had the one fence and about 2 gates. Nobody could cross the track or anything like that at that time. And I had a lot of fun there with that. And then started and ended up on the board and with you and the rest of the group. And then Kurt and I co-chairman races for a long time. Then he didn't get reelected to the board, and he still stayed with Tech with Sumner. Kurt's still around. He's up in Oxnard.
Was that Morgan? Was that his? Or
He was with he was also with the Morgan Club, and we used to rally a bit. In fact, I rallied with Davine. And she was having so much fun. We were having a ball. She was driving a VW Beetle, and somebody told her that with the rear engine, in order to get around a corner, you jerk it a little bit, like with the Porsche and all that. Well, at 20 miles an hour, it doesn't help a hell of a lot. And she's doing this all the time. But we're winning. And then Kurt decided he wanted me, so he stole me from his wife, which I didn't like, but we had a ball.
Well,
I remember
I know you were thinking the same thing.
coming through Death Valley
Death Valley.
at 54.5 miles an hour, average speed, up and down these hills, and a blur went by us at the bottom of a hill.
I was the, this, whatever, the rally marshal. I had the
Yeah,
clock, and I had this 300 SL, and the gull wing, and I saw you and Kurt and this Morgan just.
We're,
I kind of nudged my wife and I said,
Watch
"Watch
this.
this." And I must have been going 130 miles an hour when I went by you guys. All I know is that there was a lot of berets and metal, arms flapping, and
I think the car came off the ground about that far for 10 feet.
I don't. When Bobby, my wife, said, "You know, is it safe to go that fast?" And I said, "Honey, these are race cars, you know, to Mercedes." And when I got to the outside of Death Valley, and I pulled up, and I opened the door to give the clock to the checkpoint, the guy looks at the door and he says, "Hey, this thing's about ready to come loose here." And I said, "Look at this, boy." And he starts with his finger, his thumbnail, screwing the hinge back up. And I'm getting some serious looks from my wife. And the next morning, there's a flat tire on the car. And I thought, because this was a loaner from Frank Millard's car line in Encino, you know, so what do you want? Race car, right, sure.
That was a good rally. Kurt and I won.
Called Press On Regardless.
Yes, I remember that.
I went on that same rally. It was dark, and I'm flying along, and I'm driving, and I'm saying, well, there's a turnoff here somewhere, and we're both looking at this map when I go through this town, about 90 miles an hour, and go about 60 miles out of the way, and finally come to some road, and I go, oh, look, we're
Whoops, we should be back there.
turn around, and go, that was the worst. That was my one and only big rally experience. That's it for me.
No
I
more.
cut out for rally.
Oh,
Well,
rallies.
listen, guys, you know, it's great to have you here. It's,
Well, it's
was
great to
fun.
be here.
Peterson Museum and all of that.
Love the museum.
Capture some of our fondest memories. Tommy, it's great
Yeah.
to see you. You know, David.
Million. Thank you millions for asking.
Thank you very, very much for coming down. It's just been, it's fun for me to I didn't know a lot of the stuff about you. I knew a lot of things about you that I can't repeat. But I didn't know any of their history about, somewhere I knew about Peter Marshall.
Yeah.
But I didn't know about, traveling around in the Porsche. And that's how you got started. That's great.
Well, I'm glad I brought him along,
I am too.
because he
Me
talks
too.
good.
I am too.
He talks real good.
Yeah.
Never
Thanks a
shuts
lot.
up.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.